The storm came without warning that night. A gray shroud had rolled across the hills just as the mourners left the Whitmore estate, where the air still smelled faintly of lilies and old secrets. In the dim light of the hallway, Eleanor Whitmore's portrait hung above the staircase, her painted smile soft but her eyes almost watching. To the neighbors, her death had been peaceful, natural even. To her family, it marked the end of something sacred. But to one person in that house, it was the beginning of an opportunity too tempting to ignore. Hours after the funeral guests departed, the Whitmore mansion felt hollow. The rain ticked against the glass conservatory like an impatient metronome. Downstairs, in the flicker of the study's firelight, Carolyn Whitmore poured herself a glass of sherry and stared at her mother's leather-bound will folder. She had been told the attorney would handle everything next week, that all she needed to do was wait. But patience had never been one of Caroline's virtues. Not when her younger sister Margaret had always been the favored one. Not when she'd spent her life watching someone else inherit the love, the praise, and now the fortune. She set the glass down and opened the folder. A sheet of paper slid out, yellowed slightly at the edges, signed in the familiar hand of their late mother. Her name was there, but so was Margaret's, larger, bolder, mentioned twice. Caroline's chest tightened. She read the words again and again until they blurred. To my beloved daughter, Margaret, I leave the estate in all its holdings. Her own share was barely a fraction. To Caroline, it was an insult dressed in courtesy. In that silent room, beneath the storm's hum, she whispered, she chose her. The words tasted bitter. What began as grief began to curdle into something darker. A quiet resolve took hold, a decision that would soon turn love into betrayal and memory into motive. Before we go deeper into this chilling story, I want to know, have you ever seen a family torn apart by something as simple as a signature? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if haunting secrets like this draw you in, stay with me, because what's about to be exposed will leave you questioning how far jealousy can really go. The Whitmore family had been part of the Ridgevale community for generations. Old money, old traditions, and a reputation for grace that masked years of quiet tension. Their home stood at the edge of a lake, its tall windows facing the water where Eleanor used to host garden parties every summer. To outsiders, she was elegance personified, a widow who raised two daughters alone after her husband's sudden death, a woman who kept her name polished in the town's social pages. But inside the family, things were not as polished as they seemed. Caroline, the elder daughter, had stayed close. Too close, some said. She never left Ridgevale, never married, and worked part-time at the family's small accounting firm. Margaret, on the other hand, left for New York, where she became a gallery curator, her life unfolding in glossy photographs and Christmas visits. Their mother adored them both, but her favoritism was subtle and enduring. Margaret's calls were cherished, her visits celebrated. Caroline was the one who handled things. She paid bills, managed household staff, and spent most evenings at home with her mother. Yet it always felt like her loyalty went unseen. That quiet ache had built over years, turning affection into resentment. When Eleanor's health declined, Caroline was the one who signed every hospital form, every prescription. And when her mother's will was last revised, months before her death, Caroline wasn't told. That omission, she later told herself, was the proof she needed. Eleanor had never trusted her. When the lawyer, a soft-spoken man named Victor Hale, arrived for the reading, Caroline already knew she wouldn't like what she heard. The meeting took place in the drawing room, sunlight muted by the heavy drapes. Hale's voice was low, deliberate as he unfolded the document. The sisters sat across from each other, Caroline in black silk, her expression unreadable, Margaret in a dark blue dress, clutching a tissue. Hale began. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Whitmore, dated April 14th, 2022. Caroline's jaw tightened. She had been with her mother every day that spring. How could she have missed that? The lawyer read on. The estate, valued at approximately $3.2 million, was to be divided in the manner that reflects my daughter's respective contributions to my life and legacy. Margaret, named as executor, received the house, the trust fund, and control of the family's art holdings. Caroline received a modest annuity, a single lakefront property, and a thank you for her devotion. Hale folded the document gently. The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret reached out. Carrie, you know how Mom was. She just wanted— Don't, Caroline cut in. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried. Don't tell me what she wanted. That night, Caroline didn't sleep. She sat in her car outside the law office, headlights off, watching the building. Hale had mentioned a digital copy, kept in his firm's secure drive. But Caroline knew her mother's handwriting, knew her habits, her papers, her safe. Somewhere there was another draft, another version, something that would make this right again. 2 weeks later, after Margaret had returned to New York, Carolyn found herself in her mother's private study, a room that had always been off limits. She unlocked the drawer where Eleanor kept her stationery, financial records, and an embossed seal. There she found something strange, an unsigned draft of the will dated only 3 days before the official version. This one left everything to both daughters equally. No executorship, no imbalance. She read it over and over until her hands trembled. If this was real, why had it been changed? That question grew into obsession. Carolyn began contacting old staff, asking quietly about visitors in April. One remembered seeing a man from the attorney's office, but not Victor Hale. Someone younger, the housekeeper recalled, slick hair, smelled like expensive cologne. Caroline started connecting dots that weren't meant to meet. She convinced herself Margaret had influenced the revision, that her sister, knowing Eleanor's frailty, had persuaded her to shift the terms. In Caroline's mind, it wasn't inheritance anymore. It was theft, and she was about to take it back. In the following months, the Whitmore estate entered probate. Margaret handled matters remotely, relying on Hale and a trustee. Caroline, however, began to act. She visited an old acquaintance from college, a paralegal named Robert Dean, known for his discretion and quiet skill with documentation. Reports later suggested that Caroline approached him with a request to review a personal family will. What she truly asked, according to later testimony, was something else entirely. Dean would later recall, "She came to me with this draft, said her mother's final wishes were ignored. Wanted to know if I could correct it. I thought she meant interpret it, not recreate it." But the deeper they went, the clearer her intent became. Carolyn had begun drafting a new will, one that mirrored Eleanor's writing perfectly. She practiced the loops and strokes of her mother's signature, used aged parchment, and studied the ink bleed of the original. She even learned to mimic her mother's phrasing. "To my devoted daughter, Carolyn, whose steadfast loyalty has been my comfort." It read like something Eleanor might have written on a good day, something that sounded true. By late summer, the forgery was complete. She kept it sealed in a manila envelope inside her desk. She didn't know exactly how she'd use it, but when Hale called to confirm that probate was nearly finalized, she saw her window closing. That's when Caroline made her move. She arrived at the attorney's office unannounced, carrying a box of family documents. Hale, startled, invited her in. She claimed she'd found an earlier version of the will in Eleanor's writing desk. "It might change how things should be divided," she said, her tone calm, rehearsed. Hale hesitated but agreed to review it. He glanced through the document briefly, noting its uncanny similarity. Too uncanny. The signature looked perfect. The ink, however, seemed fresher than it should have. He didn't confront her, not then. Instead, he thanked her and promised to verify its authenticity. That moment should have been the end, but instead, it was the beginning of a spiral no one could stop. Because once Hale started checking the details, paper type, ink composition, date discrepancies, what he found would soon expose everything Caroline had built. And by then, it would already be too late. When Victor Hale placed the document under the flat white light of his desk lamp, something felt off. The paper was aged, but not enough. The signature, while flawless, lacked the faint tremor of Eleanor's declining hand from that spring. Her real signature, he knew too well, had grown weaker, the loops thinner, the lines slightly uneven. This one was perfect, too perfect. Hale decided to say nothing until he was certain. But as he began to run his standard authenticity check, comparing pen pressure and fiber patterns, the truth began to uncoil like a silent warning. The ink contained compounds consistent with a brand discontinued in the 1990s, a strange detail, since the alleged signing had taken place only months earlier. He knew then that what he held wasn't history, it was an imitation. Still, he needed proof before confronting Carolyn. He made copies, photographed each page, and contacted the probate court's forensic specialist. Meanwhile, Carolyn believed everything had gone as planned. Hale's calm demeanor during their meeting convinced her she had succeeded. She imagined the will would soon be accepted as an overlooked draft, the estate divided, and justice, her version of it, restored. She even called Margaret to deliver what sounded like reconciliation. "You'll see, Maggie," she said over the phone, her tone soft but loaded. "Mom wanted it fair. I just found something that proves it." Margaret didn't understand. She thought Caroline had finally accepted peace. In truth, her sister had already set her own undoing in motion. 3 days later, Hale received the preliminary analysis. The handwriting matched Eleanor's, eerily so, but under magnification, certain pressure points didn't align. The last curve of the signature cut too deeply into the paper, suggesting the writer had been pressing harder than natural. The ink's drying pattern was inconsistent with one written in 2022. It wasn't just a forgery, it was a sophisticated one. Hale knew he couldn't handle this alone. He contacted the county's probate fraud division. Within 48 hours, investigators arrived quietly, requesting to review both the official and newly discovered wills. They didn't tell Caroline, not yet. Their goal was simple: to confirm the forgery before anyone could destroy the evidence. Reports later indicated that the investigators worked late into the night, using ultraviolet light to study the document. Under that glow, faint graphite marks appeared beneath the ink, evidence of an outline, a draft beneath the signature. Someone had practiced the stroke, traced it, perfected it. Hale stood in silence as the experts nodded grimly. "It's counterfeit," one of them said, "executed by someone who knew her writing intimately." When Caroline returned to the office 2 days later to check on progress, she noticed the file on Hale's desk was missing. Her smile faltered. "Where's the document?" she asked. Hale's voice was calm but firm. "It's being reviewed, Caroline. There are inconsistencies we need to clarify." For a brief second, her composure slipped, eyes narrowing, pulse quickening. "Inconsistencies?" she repeated. "Are you accusing me of something?" Hale didn't answer. He simply said, "The court will decide." That night, Caroline drove to the lake house. The wind howled through the tall reeds as she stood on the deck, staring out at the black water. Everything she had done, she told herself, had been to restore balance, to make things fair. But as she looked back at the mansion's dark windows, she realized she'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Still, she refused to yield. She convinced herself that Hale was protecting Margaret, that they were both conspiring to erase her. The investigation deepened. Detectives quietly collected samples of Eleanor's authentic handwriting from old letters and checks. They subpoenaed digital records from Caroline's computer, searching for signs of editing or printing. What they found shifted the entire tone of the case. Hidden in her personal files were scans of Eleanor's earlier wills, along with practice sheets, repeated attempts at her mother's signature. The files were time-stamped weeks after Eleanor's death. To the investigators, it was irrefutable proof. To Caroline, it was a misunderstanding waiting to be explained. She told them she was researching family documents, but the evidence said otherwise. The confrontation came quietly one afternoon in October. Two investigators arrived at Caroline's door with a warrant. The autumn light fell cold on the porch as she opened it, her expression unreadable. Inside, they found the envelope still in her desk drawer, along with a fountain pen and multiple ink cartridges. "I was only trying to correct a mistake," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "My mother wouldn't have wanted it this way." When the news reached Margaret, she collapsed into silence. She couldn't process the betrayal. Her sister, the one who had cared for their mother through every long night, had fabricated her legacy. For a moment, she considered not pressing charges, but Hale insisted. "This isn't about money anymore," he said quietly. "It's about truth, and truth deserves to be exposed." In December, the case went public. Local news outlets reported it as one of Ridgevale's most shocking family scandals. The coverage was restrained, almost polite, but the details spoke volumes. Carolyn Whitmore, 48, was charged with forgery, fraud, and attempted misrepresentation of a legal document. The trial drew quiet crowds, boroughs, former neighbors, old friends, even the housekeeper who had served the family for decades. Each day in court revealed more of the web Caroline had woven. During testimony, handwriting experts explained the layers of deception. The defense argued emotional instability, claiming grief clouded her judgment. But the prosecution painted a different picture, one of calculation, envy, and entitlement. "This was not a moment of confusion," the prosecutor said. "It was the product of resentment sharpened over years." Caroline herself took the stand. For the first time, her voice broke. "You don't understand," she said softly. I gave up everything for her. Every part of my life was about taking care of her. And in the end, she gave it all to the one who left. The courtroom remained silent. In that silence, her confession hung heavier than any verdict could. After 8 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. The judge's words were measured, deliberate. Love can turn to darkness when we let envy rewrite memory. This court sentences you to 5 years in state custody with restitution to the estate. But punishment wasn't the end. For Margaret, the true wound came later, when she tried to visit her sister before transfer. Caroline refused. She left a single note scrawled in uneven handwriting. She was my mother too. Months later, when Spring returned to Ridgevale, the mansion was sold. The proceeds were divided according to the original will. Margaret moved back to the city, carrying both the inheritance and the weight of her sister's silence. The townspeople rarely spoke of it except in whispers. But sometimes, late at night, lights were seen flickering in the old Whitmore house. Locals said it was just contractors. Others said it was guilt, haunting what was left behind. Years later, in an interview, Victor Hale reflected on the case. "What still strikes me," he said, "is how ordinary it all began. A family, a will, a disagreement. Then something inside her snapped. It's not the forgery that haunted me, it's the loneliness that made it possible." Because in the end, that's what this story truly revealed. Not just greed, not just deception, but the quiet tragedy of a woman who spent her whole life waiting to be chosen, until she chose darkness instead. Sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't the ones told to others. They're the ones we whisper to ourselves, until we believe them enough to destroy everything else. And when the truth was finally exposed, it didn't just rewrite a will, it rewrote what was left of a family. Do you think justice was truly served? Or were there still secrets left buried beneath the surface? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want us to keep exposing the world's darkest betrayals and family secrets, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story may just reveal what someone close to you never wanted exposed.